Eileo guys, and welcome back to part 2 of the Rune video as I promised. And actually, due to the length of the video, this will be split into more parts, probably one more part, just because there's just so many characters to cover, and I at least want to give every character at least, 30 seconds of their time to shine. But let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and pull up the hero book over here, and while I'm not going to click through all the characters, like comparison between the ranks, I'll just talk about what I've seen for each character, just an overall, I guess, average view of what each character has rune and equipment wise. So let's go ahead and start off with Antra. So for Antra over here, see if we can do info. So for Antra over here, her most popular rune was the one that boosted her attack or movement speed. This is what I know as Rampage, as what you guys will see quite a lot. But Rampage is what she had equipped for her main rune. Now for her sub runes, they were based mainly on critical damage and extra skill damage, which means all of her equipment also focused heavily on critical damage first, followed by extra skill damage and a slight hint of attack speed. Now that's what I saw for Antra for the majority. Am I saying this is right? No. I'm not saying that any of this is right, so do keep that in mind. I'm just showing you guys what I've seen from the top players of this server and what they use on the characters. I'm not saying that this is right, but take it for what it is. Next up was Irene though. Her main rune was once again the most ever popular noisy rampage. And then her subs consisted once again of critical damage and extra skill damage. Her equipment followed suit where there's critical damage subs on it and then extra skill damage. I think I've seen quite a lot of critical damage on her, more so than extra skill damage, but extra skill damage was up there, or was mentioned at least quite a bit for me to add that in there. For Mubu, unfortunately there really isn't a player in US East at the time of this video that was dedicated to building him to his full potential, but he's going to follow Dean's setup with his runes and his equipment, so there's no hatred for Mubu because we're not going to leave him out. Now for Dean, which I will also add in as Mubu, there's quite a few different runes on him with players. I'm not sure if that came from him being one of the most easily accessible characters because the game gives you all of his stuff, or people just experimenting with different things. But one noticeable one was Earth Disaster for his main rune, which upon taking skill damage, the enemy that was attacked gets their extra skill damage nerfed by 20% for 8 seconds, and it has a 26-second cooldown. Is this optimal? I'm not sure. That's just one of the ones that I noticed the most on him. You can, your mileage may vary with his main rune, but his sub runes consisted of all attack, extra skill damage, and attack speed. So it seems like people were trying to squeeze a little bit more damage out of this defensive tanker than making him stay as defensive as possible, because if he's not dying and he's surviving quite well, why not try to get a little bit extra damage out of him? But honestly, with a character like Dean or Mubu, you can build them for more damage with runes, but remember that at the end of the day, they are defensive tankers. It does help, but is it necessary? No. And Dean's equipment was focused mainly on physical and magical defense with some critical resist in there. Keep in mind that the same could be said for Mubu. So Mubu and Dean, I would just basically treat them the same, basically. Next up was Claire's runes. At the time of viewing them, I wouldn't say that they were optimal at all, but once again, Noisy Rampage was victorious as the main rune, just like pretty much everyone else that is DPS, even though she's the offensive support. Her runes were based around magic attack and critical damage for more DPS, so once again, it's pretty similar to Antra and Irene. And then that was the same thing for her equipment. That was the exact same for her equipment. So her equipment had magic attack subs and critical damage subs on them as well. And take in mind, all of this is just hypothesizing and what I've seen from other players, so your mileage will vary. Next up though is our good boy Jiggle Wound. Jiggle Wound's main rune I found to be, once again, Noisy Rampage, if not something very similar to it. His sub-runes consisted of physical attack and critical damage, while his equipment followed the same path with its subs. Once again, physical attack and critical damage. So these may be more PvP builds, but in theory these should do perfectly fine in PvE as well, where your DPSs are built with whatever attack that they excel in, and then of course critical. Not for all, but for most. Next up is Gwen. Gwen was the exact same as Wound, like the exact same, where she had Rampage as her main rune, and then physical attack and critical attack subs. The same thing was said for her equipment. So my example of my Gwen having basic attack on her was just gag me with a machete, because she's going straight up just full crit and full physical attack just to get the most out of that crit. But that's pretty much Gwen and her equipment subs. So once again, Rampage, and then physical attack and critical sub runes and equipment subs. For Isha, there wasn't really a ton of reliable comparisons, unfortunately, but from what I could gather, Rampage once again is king for her main rune. Her subs should consist of physical attack and critical damage, and since she is also close range, I'm not really sure if evasion could be important. It definitely could be, but you can't go wrong with physical attack and critical damage on an assassin. I don't have an Isha built up, so I can't expertly tell you if evasion is needed, but since she is close up at least part of the time, it could help. This is just pure conjecture. Next up was Grace. Her main rune, of course, I'm going to go ahead and let you guess that. Yes, her main rune was of course Rampage. While her sub-runes consisted of physical attack, I saw some critical damage in there, plenty of evasion, and plenty of shorter skill cooldowns. I would say for the most part, I saw high evasion on her runes, and shorter skill downs was probably second the most popular for her sub-runes. The subs on her equipment focused on critical attack or physical attack, and there was also some with shorter skill cooldowns, but once again, if you have all kinds of shorter skill cooldowns on her, I don't think it could hurt, but at least make sure you're trying to boost her damage up with those lower skill cooldowns to get the most damage out of her. Next up is Maho, whatever the heck you want to call her. Her rune once again was Rampage. I couldn't find a lot of data with her runes, unfortunately, but magic attack and critical damage is pretty much the go-to for her. How well this will work, again, your mileage may vary. Possibly lower skill cooldown. I'm not an expert Maho user, so to the boys that actually use her, feel free to comment on this video and let other people know. And then her equipment should follow the same thing. But once again, I'm not exactly sure about her, unfortunately. Next up was Yeon. Her main rune was Repenter's Mirror. What Repenter's Mirror does is it debuffs the enemy's defense when they attack her, while the main stat on her sub-runes were all defensive base, which makes plenty of sense. Equipment-wise, this followed the same path. Her subs were defense and some with evasion, but her main focus that I could gather from everyone was just to make this girl tanky AF. Like, just make her super tanky, increase her all defense, increase defense in any form or fashion, just so that she doesn't die. And that's pretty much Yeon, like, nailed, my boys. 100% nailed. Next up was Lee. Unfortunately, her runes were like all kinds of crazy. They were all over the place because obviously she's used by a lot of people and she's easily accessible, but her runes were just crazy. Some people gave her magic attack, some gave her all defense, some gave her a bit of everything, even like some crit occasionally. And her equipment was pretty much similar to Yeon's, where they built her with defensive subs on all of her equipment, and they also built her with critical resist on all of her equipment. So in my opinion, at least equipment subs wise, I would aim for all defense and critical resist if possible. For her sub runes, it's really up to you. Do you want to build her more defensively? Feel free. You could also build her with some more magic attack just to give her a little bit more of an offensive edge, but it's really up to you. And once again, for the main rune, it's whatever you got at the moment. Whatever you got. Next up is Yeon. Yeon's go-to rune was once again Noisy Rampage. Her sub-runes consisted of magical attack and critical attack amount, while the subs on her gear focus yet again on more crit and more magical attack. Just all kinds of magical attack and all kinds of crit subs on her sub-runes and her equipment. Next up was Scarlett. Scarlett was pretty much identical to Yeon's in the aspects of both runes and equipment. I will mention the use of shorter skill cooldowns on her subs though. This may be more of a PvP build than PvE. I don't think it could really hurt, but it seems like her biggest focus was being able to get her skills out repeatedly so she could CC, and I believe she can also heal. But once again, just in case you guys didn't catch that, her main rune was of course Rampage. Then her sub runes were based on magical attack and then critical attack amount, while her equipment followed the same with magical attack and crit subs. So let's move on over here to Markon. For Markon, I saw Earth Disaster as her main rune. I believe ideally any debuff rune for tanks is pretty common at this point. Her sub runes focus on physical, magical, and all defense with a heavy, like I'm telling you boys, a heavy focus on defense critical damage. Like I would say even at this moment in time, if you want to build Markon, at least from what other players have done, defense critical damage was number one on the list, even above all of the others, because dudes had all kinds of defense critical damage, all kinds. Her equipment followed the same thing. There was a spread of defense, both physical and magical, but depending on the team, and if they could squeeze in the defense critical damage on her equipment subs, that's what they tried to do. For Dice, there's not really enough information on his main rune for me to tell you which will work, but this could follow suit to Lee, where you just have to figure out what works for you in what situation, because I'm not sure if there's one main rune for him, but I did see like an HP recovery rune for him, so do keep that in mind for his main rune at least. Now his sub runes were focused heavily on physical and magical defense. The subs on his equipment were both defenses, so physical and magical, some all defense subs, and some evasion here and there, which makes sense because he is kind of up in your face in terms of the heals. Next up for Reinhardt, his main rune was an HP recovery rune, which is quite interesting. So I believe once he got enough damage, he would have the HP recovery rune proc to heal him some, which definitely isn't bad. I think it had like a 30-second cooldown on it or something like that, but that was his main rune. His sub runes consisted of either HP or all defense. His equipment had a spread once again in terms of subs. Some had all defense on them, some had magical, and some had evasion. I believe all defense and defense crit damage are the ideal subs for him, but once again, this is just advice. That's all it is. And then next up is Ocasio. For Ocasio, her main rune was, of course, Rampage, but this one was Sweeping Rampage and not Noisy Rampage, while her sub-runes were split between full-on magical attack and crit, while others also threw in some magical defense for some reason. I'm not really sure why, but it was there. And her equipment subs focused on magical attack with critical damage, as well as some shorter skill cooldowns. I would definitely say that maybe magical attack and critical damage are probably the best for her. Once again, mine isn't up at a level where I could tell you confidently how to build her, but this is just what I've seen so far. So I definitely hope this helped, my boys. I'm going to go ahead and end the video here because if not, it's going to be half an hour long, and maybe you guys only wanted to see it for certain characters, but I will see you guys in the next part of the Rune video. I definitely hope this helps, and thank you so much for watching.